Hey adapters, welcome back. Today our guest is Sameera Chukkapalli. Sameera is an advanced architect and director of Needlab. Needlab has implemented 46 projects on 4 continents, directly impacting over 5,000 people. She spends most of her time drafting human and environment-centered design solutions with communities around the world. Currently, she is driven towards solving the UN Sustainable Development Goals and making sustainable design solutions reachable to all. Sameera will talk about how her organization, Needlab, is working with communities around the world to design and build dignified, resilient housing and public space solutions for the next 3 billion. She highlights that 40% of carbon emissions are from the construction sector and explains how participatory design and community holistic development can mitigate it. Hi, Sameera. Welcome to the show.
Hello, thank you for having me.
Well, welcome. Very excited about this conversation we're going to have. And 3 billion is an ambitious number, and it's a very ambitious number, but it's good. It's a great number, right? We're gonna jump into Need Lab and what you're doing there. But I thought just to get started, maybe to get a little bit more background. You're an architect, but what is your background? How did you get into this space?
Well, you're right, I'm an architect, and 3 billion is a big number. I studied architecture in India and then worked in quite a few interesting offices around the world. And I understood that housing and public space needs are far beyond what I was aware of, and the industry kind of understands. So I decided to travel more and work with different communities on the grassroots level to get a holistic understanding of what are the needs. And then I did my master's, and then thought like 3D printing housing could be a great solution, and did my thesis on that. And quickly realized that a lot of communities that I'm working with that cannot be implemented today, even though that could be done in a few years. So I founded Needlab to work with the community directly and design solutions based on their needs, participation, and what's available right on the ground there. And that has led us to be here today. So we're excited.
All right. So just providing affordable housing or housing whatsoever with people that obviously can afford these things, and then sustainable housing, those could be two very separate things. I mean, what was that journey to kind of marry those two? Because they're not necessarily complementary of each other. Hopefully you can do it that way, and it's not that, I think, if you're willing to do that. But how did you get there?
You're right. They're kind of used interchangeably a lot of times, but they're not so much, because sustainability needs a lot more layers for housing to be sustainable. One thing is, where's the money coming for the project? Is that sustainable? Will the project sustain the actual need of that housing? Are the materials that are being used for the construction sustainable? That means, where is that material coming from? How much emissions does it have during extraction, during the build period, and its lifetime? And also energy that's in the building. So there are a lot of factors that you need to consider. And also, are the people happy? Will they live in these houses long term sustainably? And will that create prosperity in making these communities contribute back to the world that they are part of? And that is the ultimate goal, like that the community should be happy and thriving and become fully independent. So I believe housing does all of that, and should and can. So yeah, that's why we champion sustainable housing, and not just affordable. Sustainable housing can be affordable, and that's our aim.
Well, I'm not sure how much you track it here in the United States. I know you're based here now, but affordable housing and sustainable housing, those could be two very different conversations. And so, hopefully we're hearing more about people trying to merge those two. But with Need Lab, give us who's there, who's working there, what is the organization?
We're a nonprofit. We're registered in Barcelona, Spain. I started it. And then we have a lot of designers and architects, engineers, makers from all around the world. We typically have leaders from the community we work with. They kind of become part of the project and become the first information source and also implementers on ground. So each project we pull together sometimes psychologists, sometimes doctors, sometimes design researchers, and implementing contractors as well, and do projects on the ground. So we've built projects in Vietnam with a whole Vietnamese team on the ground. So whatever money that comes into the project is redistributed in that community. So not a lot of resources are removed from there, even though we're an international organization. And we do fundraising also locally. So there's certain responsibility that if this community needs to progress, then we should and can source it, and we share that. So yeah, each time, each project, we pull together different talents from all around the world.
So how did you settle on Barcelona? How did you make that your headquarters?
Well, it's an easy answer. I don't know if others heard, but as we both were talking about it earlier, it's sunny, it's happy, people are incredibly friendly. Apart from that, the food, and I did my master's there, so it was kind of like I started Needlab during my education. I was within the university. I still hadn't declared my thesis, so it was this phase, I think, when you're too frustrated, you want to do something, but you're not a graduate yet. I kind of pulled the trigger and registered it right there. I was like, I can do it. I can do it today. And
I know, I love that. You think of these companies, they're like, well, we're going to resettle in Dallas because real estate's cheap and the labor's cheap. And you're like, well, the food's good, it's sunny, and I enjoy it. So I love your thinking there. So the title of this episode is Dignified Resilient Housing for the Next 3 billion. And we talked about that a little bit earlier, but how did you get at 3 billion? Why that number?
Mhm. The UN Habitat is working with the European Union, and they have a participatory slum redevelopment project that's been happening for the past decade. They have data on this. They have collected immense data of people who are living in the slum and have projected what would it be with the population increase in 2030. So this number that we are looking at, 3 billion, is the number of people who will be having no or very little access to stable housing in 2030. Currently, there are 1 billion people who do not have access to safe and secure housing. And that could be anywhere between lack of land rights, lack of shelter, lack of roof or a door that they can lock, or that they have to live in a very small footprint in a very crowded situation. So, all of that grouped together, this data is from the UN Habitat.
Okay, so the sustainable development goals, those are very important. They drive a lot of decisions, how all these sort of international players kind of interact with some of these countries, and how, like, were there particular ones you're like, okay, we really fit in that slot? And then you even think about funding, because you're probably obviously very interested. You want to scale maybe with some of these things, but I mean, I guess give a little bit more backstory how you're targeting the sustainable development goals is driving, your target there.
Oh, that's a great question. Yeah, they are interconnected, but we are specifically targeting the SDG number 11, which is sustainable cities and communities, and climate action. As we should hold responsibility for the construction that we are doing to host people. That doesn't mean we can harm Earth. So yes, we're tying into that, and a little bit of like decent work and economic growth as well, and innovation. So we have four, but two mainly: climate and SDG number 11. So we're doing a lot of partnerships with companies who are producing sustainable material, clean energy solutions like solar panels, and materials that are local, and combining with them and doing research as such, developing prototypes with them that could address this demographic that they haven't worked with previously. This is a huge number that we're looking at. If we bring on board a company and we decide to do a slum upgradation project with them, we're looking at 100,000 houses. So that's a huge scale. So we're kind of working with different companies under the CSR program for the R&D in the beginning, hoping that we could scale it and build and support a lot more communities.
How does the process actually work? So you'd mentioned Vietnam as an example, and maybe you want to share some others of specific countries. But is it you meet a partner at a conference, or there's a particular demand How does that work? Where and are you actually on the ground doing that, or do you have some of the people that are in your organization that do that?
Great question again. Both. We meet people at conferences and connections happen, and also stakeholders are involved, which is construction industry, material manufacturers, and also local governments are key players in the projects. Usually, what happens is a community reaches out to us, and they're like, "Hey, look, we did not have public spaces, or we have a lack of housing." And then I kind of talk to them, and then the team kind of looks at the interaction, and they're like, "Hey, is this possible?" Then we look for a sponsor or a foundation or a partner we can work with, someone who is giving us material for at least initial pilots, or kind of would sponsor it, and we partner with them and build it. Perfect example is in Kenya. We partnered with Vishaka Industries, which is a great product manufacturer, and then we built the housing with them. And they had a cool solar panel that they wanted to R&D, and we built housing with them to see whether
Wow.
it's viable. And we're testing it now, so it's a great feedback as well. Like people tell us, like, no, we want changes here, and then we can make it better. So
Do you feel like the networks are set up in most of the countries well? Because you think if it's sustainable that you do want to locally source some of it. It's not always practical to locally source everything, but you have to figure out quickly. Oh well, Kenya, we know that they can provide 95% of the materials, but you still got to figure out who they are, right? I mean, how does that work? Or do you feel like maybe that information's already out there and it's easy to access?
Oh, well, yes and no. Some countries and cities, it's easy. Networking, maybe linguistic barriers, or also reliability and trust. Most those three would be the key factors. We do spend good amount of time researching backgrounds of the companies, who are reliable partners, building relationships with them, and having that bond first, whether we are on the same page, and then going forward and saying what are your key takeaways that you want from it, and what do we want, and if that's aligned, then we go ahead and implement. Usually it takes anywhere between 3 to 6 months to set up local stakeholders in one country, and we make sure that we choose those so we can do more projects together, not just a one-time thing.
So the sustainable development goals, they've been around for a while and there's been some adjustments and such, and I think they're struggling too. I've had this conversation with folks who work in other areas with climate change emerging. It keeps emerging as this big issue. Has it come across in the work that you're doing? If you think about sustainable housing, that too could be a little bit separate from, well, what are the impacts of climate change? Is this a resilient community? Are they in a flood zone? Are those conversations coming up more and more with the people that you're working with?
Definitely. Not in a way that we'll solve everything related to housing by 2030. That's definitely a very ambitious goal. But the idea is not to solve everything by 2030. It's to get on the right track, make
Right.
people understand the need and work towards it, and have bold promises to be aligned, but yet still take action. Yes, I've seen, because governments do understand right now the economics in it. If they don't strategize and plan ahead, you're going to spend more in climate mitigation, move people when there's a flash flood, give them temporary housing, and relocate them back when the flash flood is over in Bangladesh and other locations. So there's a lot more cost involved in doing that for a government than actually building resilient housing in places which have been mapped for no flooding or very minimal, and the houses being, off the ground and tolerant and resilient, so the people don't have to migrate and move. So yes, the economics plays a huge role in convincing governments in this.
We should. I need to look up the name, but I interviewed someone who was had a startup in India, and he was sequestering carbon from the atmosphere and creating tiles. And they were going to using those tiles, and it would be a perfect fit. Here, so it's
Yeah.
sustainably sourced, and it's solving the climate problem too. That was a really cool thing that he was doing. Well, and on that note too, with climate change, there's this conversation that with the impacts, it's going to be a mass movement of people. As extreme heat, flooding, people are going to be moving around, and they're going to need housing, and so maybe that kind of goes against. I don't know if your focus really more on the permanent housing, but the notion that sustainable housing, even if it's more transitory kind of housing for people. These conversations must be coming up more.
Definitely, there's a fear of that. As coastline regions, the maps keep getting revised very often because the flooding is more frequent. Rivers and other water bodies close to some coastline areas are getting flooded more often than they were before in the last decade. So there is a lot of conversation about migration based on that. So yeah, one of the solutions that we made for housing is detachable. Yes, it is off the ground. Yes, it is made from sustainable material. It is completely off grid, collects rain and all that. Can grow food as well. They can take it down and move if needed with the house. Again, land rights becomes a huge issue again for that. If people move, then will they have land rights in the new location they are relocating to? I would love a nomad life. I think anyone would. I would migrate for warmer climates always, but can we all afford to have that safe haven when there's a climate disaster is a bigger question.
I'm curious. I haven't really thought about it, but United States, is it a unique thing? Because affordable housing here in the United States, mobile homes are one of the major kind of ways people live in affordable homes here. Is that a thing anywhere else in the world? Like the mobile homes? I just not. Is there space for that in Europe? I mean, you don't necessarily see that in maybe developing. But that is probably our major like sort of low cost housing that we have in the United States.
Yeah, I've seen a lot of movement in like small housing or, these buses being converted into houses and tiny home movement, container housing as well. I think it's more popular in the United States because I feel people have the ability to work from the moving locations that they are moving to. And other places don't have that luxury
Right.
to pick up their house and move, because one of the reasons people settle is the job or the income streams, or for someone who's has a family, it's children and their school and other family commitments. So for someone who doesn't have those, definitely I think they have the luxury to move around. But tiny homes is a big movement right now, and I think it is sustainable because the lesser footprint you need to heat, the lesser resources you need and consume, the more sustainable you are.
I just recently had a conversation where mobile homes are ignored by a lot of local governments. They end up in floodplains. And so a lot of decisions that are putting people at risk, mobile homes ultimately are ending up in sort of pushing the envelope of like, okay, if that's why you just hear all these bad things happen to mobile homes. And if you were to take care of your mobile home communities, even though there's other issues involved, that you're probably doing a much better job on sort of being resilient in the face of climate change. It was really interesting. Sort of the idea of affordable housing could sort of be a canary in the coal mine. So I wonder if that sort of applies to other countries.
Yeah, and I think there's a stigma. I don't know if it's here, that's attached to nomadic lifestyle. I think if that's destigmatized and it's given a sustainable, more holistic way that someone's actually caring for nature and they're contributing back to the community, then probably more people will adapt and that will contribute in a bigger scale. So I think destigmatizing that is very important as well.
That's very true. So how has COVID impacted your work? I don't want to say COVID. And you actually are working on some COVID related projects too within the organization, right?
Yeah, that was like we have all these designers just sitting waiting when we could go on ground and build houses again, kind of hack that we did. We're used to building houses or habitation spaces. So we were like, how can we make masks sustainable? And we built a device that could kind of sterilize masks. And we were like, okay, we could we could do this, reduce the footprint of number of masks going into waste. So we did work on that, and it it was great. Like almost 40,000 people accessed it, open source files, and we always love working on open source projects. Most of our designs are open source, so yeah, we enjoyed this. To answer your first part of the question, it's been hard. We can't be on ground, we can't travel. Also, the participatory nature of bringing people together and discussing with them what kind of benches do they want, how much playground space do they want, or what should their streets be like. Those conversations are much harder digitally and also inaccessible to a lot of communities that we work with.
So what must also be playing in is that the vaccine's getting out there. It's getting out here in the United States, getting out in Europe, but some of the developing countries, there's going to be a delay. So even though you might get your vaccine, this issue of still getting out in the field, it's gonna be staggered. I'm sure that's factoring into the work that people who do international work.
Definitely, that's a huge concern because I think developed countries have accessed a little more than what they would consume in fear of needing, let's say, vaccines again or other factors. That has led to like a shortage. We feared that. But to be honest, we're predicting 12 to 16 months
Wow.
before we can be on ground, honestly, because we could be vaccinated, but because the scientific journals say that you could carry the virus even though you're vaccinated. Um, a lot of WHO reports say that. So we don't want to take something to the communities who are safe. So we don't want to be on ground until everybody is safe and has access to vaccines. And
Well, you're hearing talk of like vaccine passports, be it attached to your existing passport, and that's gonna, I think, work itself out probably over the next 3 to 6 months as more people. But yeah, a particular country might say, "All right, show me your paperwork," and what would you back? It's what a complicated thing, and yeah, it's a shame. So, what I guess as we get to this interview, what does that mean for you? If you're not actually getting out in the field working on with those masks, that's an incredibly important thing that you did. What's next for you?
we are working with local governments, so we kind of building a parallel track or like a train track with bills that were introduced in Kenyan government, where land rights are being issued to different some dwellers. So once those bill is passed, that's a huge achievement for them because then they have the right to the land they are currently living in. That gives them opportunity to choose what they build there. That's where we come in, and then we will be working with them directly, deciding what community center do they want, and how would they like their house to be, and what is their projection growth if their income increases in the next 5 years. So we're doing that in Kenya right now, and that would be the first place we would be on ground if borders open up and if it's safe for the community for us to be there.
Okay, and so if someone wants to work with you or learn more about what you guys do, what should they do?
They could go to our website, needlab.org. Very simple. And then you could reach out to us with the form there, or you could reach out to me directly on LinkedIn, and we'll be more than happy to answer questions or conduct a design workshop for you and your community in the meantime.
Well, excellent. Well, it's great the work that you're doing, incredibly important, and I hope that it's not 12 to 16 months, but you never know. But I'm going to take you into just chatting as we close out this episode. But thank you for what you're doing, and thanks for coming on to Simpatico.
Thank you so much.
Okay,
It was great being.
hold on one sec. I'm going to get you into just chatting.